Welcome to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School, where we explore all kinds of things, stories about quilting, tools, field trips, maybe some famous quilters stop by, and a little bit of copyright thrown in just for fun. I'm Elizabeth Townsend-Gard. I'm a law professor at Tulane University Law School, and I just want to quilt. So today we talked to Pam Cobb. She is part of the duo that is the Stitch TV show, which is on YouTube and is all about quilting and sewing and is really funny. We just finished interviewing Lynn. We did 2 separate interviews, and she talks to us not only about Stitch TV, but also her podcast, which is Hip to be Square, which has been on since 2010. We talk about that and what podcasting was 8 years ago, still on now, and it's really fun. All right, well, I'm super psyched to be here. I was really sad we couldn't quite meet up when I was in Atlanta, but that's okay, because that happens.
But I will get to see you in Houston.
Yeah, I'm excited. Now, are you going to be there for market or festival or both?
Yes.
For both?
So all of market and then festival, I think just on the Friday, and I've got to drive home Saturday.
Oh my goodness, that's a long drive. And then do you have a booth there, or what are you guys doing while you're there?
Yes, we have a booth at markets.
Uh-huh. Cool.
Like one of the, give me the cheap one by the column.
Right.
6x9 space. I'm like, we don't need much. It's first year. And then for festival, we're just kind of floating, I think.
Come hang out with us. We have a booth.
Yes. I heard we're making an appearance at your booth.
Totally. You're totally making an appearance. This is so great. Email me, because we're going to start working on all of that. Yeah. Okay. And then, we could get like signed, autographed patterns, right? Things like that. We got to figure out we got to have like some stuff going on.
Yep.
Yeah, we can't figure out what we're doing with our booth. We've got so many ideas, and we got a teeny tiny booth. So our booth ideas are way outside of the scope of our booth. We're gonna have to stack them like up high, as opposed to
yeah, like vertical space.
Exactly. Just have them like the quilting people be like, "What are you doing? You cannot hang a couch up there."
Fire hazard.
Have a ladder up to a couch. Oh my gosh, we're so building a clubhouse.
Loft beds, yes.
Totally, right? That'd be great, right? Get one of those, build a loft. Oh my gosh. Yeah, they'd be so mad at us. Okay, we're going to officially begin. So, we're preserving these for the Quilt Alliance. So tell me your name and what you know. Tell me your name and where you're calling from.
So my name is Pam Cobb. I am calling you from the Atlanta, Georgia area.
So very cool. So I'm super psyched to chat with you on a number of levels. First of all, because you've been in my life for a long time. Not a long time, a few weeks. Oh, look at what I made. This is your pattern, right?
Yes, that is the Nope quilt.
Yeah, exactly. I saw it at the Red Hen, and I'm like, I have to make that. So I bought it, and I made it, and I'm still working on it, but it's getting there. Yeah, you've got this great quilt, and it says Nope on the front, and then I cannot, which I thought was going to be my quilt. Like, no one else is going to use this quilt. It's going to be for me. Because it was so great, and it was like, right, who does that with a quilt? You do.
We call that the spa day quilt. Like, you put the quilt on, and it's your own personal spa day, because it's a clear signal for everyone else to leave you alone, which is the best part of going to a spa.
Totally. Well, when my kid was little, we all had mottos. Ridiculous. But mine was right or wrong, I'm going to bed.
Ah.
That was my motto, which kind of fits into your Nope. My day is done. I don't care what anybody has to do, but I'm going to bed. So good luck. I will see you at 6 a.m. again. Okay, cool. Well, I would love to talk to you about Stitch TV and obviously Hip to be Square podcast, which has been on since 2010. Am I right?
Yes, October 2010.
Now, when you did, first, I have to ask you the first question, which is, what's your first memory of someone sewing or quilting in your life? I know the answer to that because you've written about it, but
I don't have a memory where there wasn't sewing or quilting.
Yeah,
there's not a time when there wasn't sewing or quilting in my life. So my mother and both grandmothers sewed. And my maternal grandmother, Grandma Eddie, which is part of our company name, Ed and Eddie, did some quilts. but they were double knits, tied, not real traditional quilting cotton, but she was making them with the leftovers from our clothes. And because I was born in the 70s,
I
we were
love
pretty
it.
groovy like that.
That's very cool. I love it. I love it. We really are very kind of dismissive of those sometimes, and I think they're really culturally important. And people don't, I don't know, they just get dismissed in a kind of funny way,
Well,
you know?
it's certainly going to outlast all of us.
It's so true. They're like they only quilted with polyester, says people 200 years or 400 years from now. Who knows?
Like
How
really fond of mushroom prints.
exactly, exactly. One of our neighbors has the she thinks it's the ugliest quilt that's ever been. It's like orange. It's the weirdest colors, and it's like and really it's just an awesome quilt. And I every time I see it, I'm like, and now she's donating it to a museum. A museum likes it, so I see. Sometimes you just don't know. It's great. Okay, so tell me how Hip to Be Square. Let's start with the podcast since that came first. Tell me about
Sure.
the podcast. Tell me how it started and how is podcast different then, long time ago, 5 years ago. But how was it different than it is now? Because I think it is different 5 years ago. Am I
Yes,
right?
for sure. So
Yeah.
I had been sewing since I was 5 myself, but I started quilting right when I got married in the year 2000 because my mother-in-law was a quilter. And I thought, well, I need something to talk to her about other than kids. So I had been dabbling in quilting for about 10 years at that point. And I had previously been on a sci-fi science fiction podcast and thought podcasting is not that hard. It's just talking. And there had been a group of quilting podcasters that a small core. So like Off Kilter Quilt with Frances Dowell and Sandy from Quilting for the Rest of Us. And so they and Allison from Within a Quarter Inch had been like talking to each other via podcasts. And I was like, oh, I could talk to them too. And so it took me a couple months to get it up and running. But I started that podcast around the same time that I joined the Atlanta Modern Quilt Guild.
Oh, how cool.
And it really was just like a diary of like what I've been quilting and sewing this week. And I had some very enthusiastic cats that contributed that would sit on me and purr into the microphone.
That's great.
and you know, and doing that 8 years ago, gosh, it was just like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I had laid out like a month's worth of podcast topics, got through them all in the first episode because I talk so fast.
That's so good.
And I was like, oh. I've always had a full-time job. So at the time I was in a not terribly challenging job. And so I had a lot more brain bandwidth to do sewing and quilting. And so there was a lot more going on then. And then I would say, gosh, probably 3 years into that, like kind of got to a point where I had changed what I was sewing. Because 3-4 years ago, Lynn and I started the Stitch TV show.
Right.
And that's now a business, which is, we were just marveling at like, wow, we've been in business 3 years. Like,
That's
whoa,
so cool.
goodness.
We want to talk about that. That's so cool. So Hip
Yeah.
to Be Square was not a business. It was just like a hobby
Me
and something to do. Now, did
chop
you
it up.
ever monetize Hip to Be Square, or sort of did you feel pressure to grow your audience or anything like that? Or just let it out there?
I would hear other podcasters do it and have a fleeting thought of like, yeah, I should try that. But no, since I was working full time, I didn't need it to support household funds. And honestly, I was able to cover the cost of, you know, website hosting and all that with my full-time pay. So I never felt the pressure. I thought like, oh, I should get a sponsor. Or, oh, I should get someone to sponsor a giveaway. But I never really took it anywhere.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh, I like the cozy nature of it. We just called them like the
it's great. And yeah, so that's interesting. And then Stitch TV, though, is different in that sort of how you're approaching it. Talk to us. We just talked to Lynn about it. So, but in case people didn't hear that podcast, tell us a little bit of what is Stitch TV and how did it begin?
So the Stitch TV show started off as the first online quilt talk show.
So cool.
And then it's expanded quite a bit because our primary format's video, which is honestly kind of a big commitment to have your hair and makeup together for that many times during a month.
So true.
Whereas
true,
a podcast,
we're
like
not
I just
airing these because
Right.
look, this is not going. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
you look gorgeous.
Well, I got my hair did for today because I'm going to tour all these schools for open house because school's
nice.
starting soon for my kids. So I'm like, don't look like a hot mess when you meet the teachers.
Yes.
That being said, like, so we started the stitch because we're like, we really like talking about quilts. We do it all the time. People think we're hilarious.
You are hilarious.
Why not
you guys are so
more
funny.
people?
Yeah. It's
do it
great.
for more people.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, we got Lynn's phone is pretty fancy. So we started off like recording. We left our first episode, even though it's horrendous. It's like, you can't tell if anyone's got pimples because nothing's really in focus. So we got that going for us. But changed quite a bit from episode 101. And we brought on our friend Ray and her husband that does production for us to like set the lighting, get the cameras going, and and it's professional because we're paying for their services. And poor Lynn's husband does our sound, but he doesn't get paid. I assume she makes him nice dinners or something.
That's very good.
It's just like it's just like 3 people watching us film when we record all that. And then we've tried different things. We did celebrity interviews. We haven't done them as much because I changed my day job and it's a little more intense and it's harder to get scheduled bookings available for that.
Yeah.
So we dabbled in that for a bit. We'll probably go back to that at some point. And then we've done virtual stitch-ins, which is something that the quilting podcasters used to do. And it used to be like a free-for-all, hey, whoever's free, come join us Friday night, we're hanging out. Yeah. And we had to change it so it was just the 2 of us and then an occasional friend because it was just getting to be so many people. The noise was unmanageable.
Were you doing it where were you hanging out?
So we would hang out in our respective sewing rooms. We live 3 miles apart. So it's not that far. But we've had some bandwidth challenges for my internet. So the last couple months I've gone to her house just to circumvent those problems where there'd be weird lags or something. Once I get my home internet service changed, we'll go back to our respective sewing rooms. Yeah.
Interesting. And then, okay. So how is Stitch TV show different than Hip to Be Square in terms of the economic side of it? Like in terms of that's a business.
In terms of the economics?
Hobby, right?
Oh, yeah, I would say Hip to Be Square is still just a hobbyist podcast. You do get some behind the scenes of the stitch where I'll talk about like, we're planning for market and some of the pitfalls and perils in that. Yeah. But it is still very much I made a quilt for my mom, which isn't necessarily an official topic for the stitch. The stitch is sometimes focused on industry trends. It's focused on tips and techniques. And because it's video, it's easier to show some of those things. I've always joked that it's hard to have podcasts about a visual medium like quilts.
It's true.
How can you really describe fabric?
Right, yeah. So I know. So because you're like, sometimes I'm like, okay, well, it's blue. And it's really pretty. Like it doesn't, I'm like, okay, well, this is just dumb. This is now just dumb podcasting because nobody's going to understand what I'm saying, but that's fine. I don't care. It's a research podcast. That's what we get. That's how we get around it because we're doing it for research and we don't really edit much and we don't care. It's all good. All right. So what other things? So I know I bought a pattern. I've bought one of your patterns at the Red Hen, I think. Is that the Red Hen? Yeah?
Yes.
And it was awesome. It was fun. I felt like I succeeded. It was awesome. So I'm all about I'm a okay quilter, but I want patterns that make me feel good about myself and not really cruddy about myself. And so that's my barometer.
Good.
I felt like I did it in a hotel room while we were traveling, and because I bring my sewing machine with me, and it was great, and it was awesome, and it was fun, and it was cool, and it was great. And then I also did it on the long arm, which I'm brand new at, but it gave me tons of practice space, which I thought was really great because of sort of the way it was, but not too much. So yeah, it was awesome. So tell me more about what else you're selling or your business side of it. Do you have sponsors? Tell us sort of how that's different than the podcast.
Sure. Yeah. So we have a couple different revenue streams. So we've got a sponsor. Right now we just have one sponsor for the show. For a while we had 2. Our longtime sponsor has been QT Fabrics. We
And
randomly took a
let me
selfie.
ask you a question about the sponsor part.
Yep.
What does it mean to be a sponsor, like in terms of your show?
So they write us a check,
That's nice.
and we do it on a quarterly basis. And, for that amount of money they pay us, we mention in the opening and the closing of the show, of the talk show piece, we provide links in the show notes and also on any of the social media posts that we do about the episode. One of our key things is screen caps where we happen to be making weird faces as captured during filming. Those are very popular on Instagram. Usually it's me going, making some kind of goofy face.
So great.
So they get awareness from our audience. They will also provide us fabric bundles for giveaways. They are also can send us items to be on the table with us for the talk show. So we've had like these pop-up things, the pattern from the Gypsy Quilter, and we just play with them like they're trampolines, honestly.
That's really
all
great.
the
Yeah, I've seen
shows.
that. Very cool.
So it's they're giving us money, which helps us fund new equipment, some of the starter funds we need to write the patterns. They will also provide us fabric for our patterns if we request it. So we've got a new Block of the Month program that's starting at Red Hen locally in Marietta, and they provided all the fabric for us to make all 3 sample quilts, the step outs that we need to teach the class, the finished set of blocks for each of the 2 fabric colorways. So it's worked out well. They've been great partners for us. For a while, we also had Famore Scissors as a sponsor, and now that's transitioned. So they're more of a business mentor than a sponsor, and that's worked out fine because they can give us advice on different things. I'm trying to think, we put together our media package to talk about our reach and our engagement, and we've thought we'd be open to someone sponsoring a virtual stitch-in or sponsoring, whatever celebrity interviews. But Lynn and I also think we don't want it to be awkward, like it's just one big commercial, because the stitch really is about us and our relationship. And we're happy to have more friends, especially friends that could give us money to help pay for some of the equipment. But we didn't want it ever to be disingenuous. We also do a monthly quilting book club where, once a month, like this last one, we did scrap quilt books and we went through some of our favorite authors, but I think it would be awkward to have an actual publishing company sponsor that.
From a publisher and you had a relationship, it would sort of lose its authenticity is what you're saying.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, and we see this, right? We see this with Quilt Folk magazine, which doesn't have advertisers, and other magazines that are folding. There's a kind of, and sort of the world we live in, which is an authentic world. We care. We want people to be real, and we don't want to be tricked by you've got to, right? The only reason you like this is because they're giving you money to say that.
Yeah. And Lynn and I have been very upfront with the audience of hey, we're recommending things we like. These are tools we use. These are books we use. I would never want to recommend a book they sent us a free one. It would be very honest about they sent me this book. I don't know about that. But we also don't want to be the people that are trash talking anything.
Yeah.
Because there's enough negativity in the world already.
Totally. Yeah. I hear you. So I'm on your website. Tell me a little bit about the shop. How does the shop work? How does the logistics of the shop work? So you've got
our online store.
Yeah.
So we've got quilt patterns. That is a growing revenue stream. We might be up to 16 now. And, we started off, we sell PDFs online, and then we've just been picked up our entire line by Brewer. And that's an exclusive deal. So we're doing something with them at Market 2. We don't know what yet. So we sell the paper, hard copies. We've sold through Red Hen because, one of the owners is a friend of ours. And that's been a good test market. We joke that we think the reason Brewer picked us up is because I had pie charts for them of here's the patterns that sold well online. Here's the ones that sold in person. Have some data, please.
Yeah. That's really great. Well, I mean, that's part of it, right? That they don't have to be surprised. Now, tell me about the No Regrets pre-fused applique kit. So
the pre-fused laser cut applique is emerging for us. We just have the one out there now. We've got 2 more that are just about ready to be launched. We've got plans for 4 more in addition to that by the time market comes around, because it's kind of weird to go with like only one thing in a product line to market. So we're beefing that up. And those have all been kind of like funny sayings
Really
or
great.
things that kind of relate to quilting and sewing.
No, it's
and
so great. So
we've partnered with again our friend.
Yeah, the No Regrets is so great. I so have to get one of these because it's so funny. Now I don't know if No Regrets is a great bannery thing, and it's got a scissors and a ripper out, a seam ripper, and it's so clever. It's so clever. It's so clever. It's so clever. Now, are you doing this? Isn't the co-owner of the Red Hen do fusible applique kits? Is this how are you making the laser cut that's a big investment. So is that how you're getting those kits, is through her?
Pretty much. Yeah, it's through Andy and her husband have a company, and I think it is Atlanta Laser Engraving is their website. But they don't advertise that as, part of their website. But because we know them and they have the laser cutter, we will go pick out fabrics we want, and based on the number of cuts and how many different fabrics and all that stuff, they'll give us a price. Then we estimate like, okay, how much profit do we want to make if we sold it wholesale, and then what's the retail price? And so, they get a cut from being the manufacturers. We get a cut from being the creators. Ideally, if quilt shops pick it up, they get a cut, so.
It's really great. It's really clever. And it's got so much detail on it. That's what's so amazing is.
We've also got show merchandise on there, and that's through a back-end partnership with a company called Printful that does on-demand printing.
All right, hold on just a second.
And they have an entire catalog of things.
Okay, let me see. I can't get back to. I'm always worried. Okay, so the show merchandise, is that what you just said? Go to the show merchandise next. It's loading. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, so I could get a long sleeve T-shirt that is very cute that says the Stitch TV with your cute logo, which we want to talk about in just a second.
Yes.
Babies don't care.
No, that's a common saying of ours from season 1. We were talking about baby quilts.
Babies don't care.
And we're like, who cares if your points don't match? Babies don't care.
They really don't. They don't.
Babies
I like
don't
it.
They do not.
Babies don't care. That's for your diehards fans.
Yeah.
That's really great.
That's a pretty deep
cut. I love it. So where do you get this merchandise from?
So it's actually our site is just a front end, and there's for the geeks out there, there's an API handoff to the back end partner called Printful that will actually do
like Printville. Is that what you're saying? Printville.
Printful.
Printful.
Full.
Oh,
Yep.
Yeah.
So they have on-demand printing in Europe and North America.
That is so cool.
And someone gets an order and they'll go print it. They do embroidery and printing. We haven't done the full range. Like, I didn't know that we needed a Stitch TV show bikini. You're all welcome for not putting that up there.
I'm there. Backpacks. Oh, I'm so going to get a backpack. That's so cool. So, wow. Phone cases. That's really cool. And so you're putting it up there. You put up your design, and then you choose what you want at your site, and then people can buy it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the way it goes? That's very easy and reasonable. Wow, that's very easy
and
reasonable.
It's different. It's different than going with like a Zazzle because the storefront's integrated with your online shop. So we didn't have to have like a site for show merchandise and a site for our patterns. Like, it's all just one site.
It's just all one site. That's so insanely great. And how do you like it? How have you liked what you've seen? Like, are you happy with what you've got?
So far, yeah. I would really love it if they had yoga pants, because that's kind of on brand for us.
Yeah. They have leggings on their front.
Yeah,
page.
Weird tight leggings.
Yeah.
No,
that's not what you're going.
Those aren't pants. Leggings are not pants.
You know what? I have this conversation with my teenager all the time. Leggings are not pants. Like, put a skirt on.
Yeah.
We have a lot of conversations about this right now. That's interesting. And then you get a percentage. I'm confused. The products and pricing on their site is the whole. How does it work exactly?
Yes. It's a wholesale price. So they say, okay, here's your cost for this design. What do you want to sell it for? And so we may make $2 on something, or we may make $5, or we may make $12.
Got it.
And it just, depends on how we price it. And we've never wanted to, it's not like a sweatshirt is an exclusive item.
See.
Like, let's be reasonable.
Right, right. So that has a mug here. So there's a mug. It's $8. You sell it at 10, you get $2 profit. And then makes it very simple.
Yep.
But nothing's been printed, so you don't have to deal with like no minimums, all that. That's so great.
Right. We don't have to keep inventory, which is good.
And they're sending you a check. Is all of the money is it getting purchased at their site or at your site? Where's the shopping cart? Is it at?
So it's on our site.
It's on your site. And
so the way it works is someone purchases from our site. We get a PayPal fund. We get an immediate, the order goes to Printful. Then they immediately bill us in reverse to our PayPal account for the amount of the actual cost of the item.
You don't have to do anything. They just take it from your PayPal.
Pretty much.
That's so great.
They just take it and then we're done. Yeah. So we just get the email and we're like, hey, we sold a mug.
That is so cool. I love it. All right. We still have to do this. We have to experience it. All right.
Yes. For the quilting army, they need some bling.
I'm sorry. Say it again.
The quilting army needs some bling.
We do need bling, right? We so need bling. Yes, we're having these conversations. It's ridiculous. We have this booth. We don't know what we're doing with it. And what what the quilt market does is it gives us a nonprofit booth, which is super great because we're a nonprofit. But then they're like, here's your opportunity to raise money for your project, which is great. But then we're like, oh no, I'm a law professor. How do we raise money for a project? So now we're trying to figure out what we do exactly. And whether I can get the book written before we get there, but we'll see. We're trying. It's, life is complicated. So, okay, now I'm just shopping instead of paying attention to you. So let's close this. All right. So, what has it been like? So you've been doing a podcast for 8 years and the Stitch TV for 3. How has that changed? Like, I feel like we've been doing this for a year, but it's only been up for 5 months. I feel like I've changed as a person, in a good way, I think. But I'm curious, like long term, sort of how has this changed who you are, doing these very public-y things about sort of, and it's with your friend and it's kind of your personal stuff. Do you feel different? Like, are you a different person now? Or are you the same person? I don't know.
Well, I think because I eased into public life through a relatively obscure podcast, it's not been a great shock because I was used to getting emails from people like when my cat died, getting just sympathy emails. My grandmother passed away, within a few months after I'd started the podcast. And one podcast that I've since taken down is just 5 minutes of me crying. So there's always been that community. I think because it started as community, it has never felt like weird, invasive, Hollywood culture. Certainly it's quilting, it's not, we're not the Kardashian. Like I did call us brand influencers to a potential sponsor. And I did put in parentheses, like the Kardashians, but with skills.
I like that a lot.
So it's interesting. And there's things I don't necessarily talk about. I don't really talk about my kids on there because they have a right to their own privacy. And they're at an age where, that it's up to them what gets revealed. Now, that being said, my son will join the chat on the virtual stitch-ins and like leave comments. And I'm like, go to bed, please. Why are you here? So that part's not different. So it's been very much a slow build, and Lynn and I have been very thoughtful about how we grew it. We never went out hard and heavy for like, let's get all the sponsors. We're like, ooh, that's a lot of obligation.
Yeah. No, it is interesting, isn't it? So I don't know. Like, what the point of this project for me, was to understand the quilting industry so I can understand the role of law and creativity. That's like the goal. But to get there, I realized I couldn't just ask people like, what's the role of law in your creative process? Because you'd just be like, go away. And then it grew.
Oh, I would dive in on that.
Yeah, what would you
I would
say?
dive in on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
tell
So,
me what the role of law is in your creativity then. Tell me. I'm curious.
you know, well, I think it's everything from design inception and being very aware and cognizant of my influences and what's an influence more
Yeah,
direct than others. Like, what have I seen in a fleeting instant of quilt show that's kind of stuck in my subconscious for months versus
exactly.
seeing something on Pinterest
Right.
and like, well, I could totally do that easier.
Right.
Like, I want to honor the people who came before me. That's part of
Yeah.
what Len and I want to do with this is, honor the quilting past with an eye to the future.
I
So
like
there's
that.
the design portion of it. When I think about the videos we're putting out, like, well, we never said, hey, don't show it to an audience. Like it's not the NFL where there's no rebroadcast rights.
Right, you're okay
And
with
we're
the whole
thinking through,
rebroadcast public performance thing. If a quilt guild wanted to show an episode of your at their quilt guild, you're okay with that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
am. And honestly, Lynn and I are talking about like, well, how do we get quilt shops to take advantage of our content to help them build local community?
Yeah.
And part of that's knowing to like, well, press play, freeze it when we're making a dumb face, talk about what we just talked about,
Yeah. Right.
with the people in the shop. So, we're trying to make that okay. And, we've never expressly said like do replay or don't replay,
Yeah.
rebroadcast. So, we've been cognizant of it. Like, well, I wonder if anyone's ever going to do a funny, weird remix of all our bloopers.
Right.
But
Right. But that would
I
be,
think,
yeah. Now, what about your patterns? How do you feel about the role of law in that creative process? Are you concerned about people swiping it? Do you care? Do you spend much time on that?
I mean, there is a fair amount of time on that. I know that there are sites out there that are, dedicated to sharing patterns for free
Uh-huh.
that may not necessarily have been originally sold as free. We hear about like there's a quilt designer Facebook group. And like every week there's some new horrific post about, oh, there's some secret Facebook group where they're
Right.
sharing everyone's patterns
I
that
so
were for
want to
sale.
find one
So
of these. I haven't found them. So if anybody out there that actually is part of one of these secret groups, can you get me in? Because I totally want to experience like do they like what's the hey, I got this, you know what I mean? Like I can't imagine in this day and age what that looks like exactly, because it seems like it's willful infringement. Like how could it not be
yeah,
in this day? I mean, we're way
it
past
is.
Voxer
And
and
even
Napster.
this week, there's some company has taken digital images of quilts because we all like to take nice flat shots of completed quilts. Well, they're taking that and then printing it on fabric and selling it as a blanket for $50.
Really?
Oh yeah, it's Fandom and Stitches has been affected. There was a couple other designers that were like, oh, one of mine's up there, and so now they're
Do
having
you,
to DMCA takedowns and
yeah.
through Shopify and a whole big shop.
Interesting. Interesting.
So
Okay.
from my perspective, like some of that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Yes, we're trying to do this as a business. I'm not going to nitpick if someone gets a copy of our pattern, makes the quilt, like, oh, awesome, cool quilt. They're only going to make it once, give the pattern to a friend. Like
Yeah.
that happens.
Yeah.
It's community. And not, we're, we can either make a dime or pinch a penny. Like
Right.
we need to be more focused on making a dime instead of going after people that are hobbyists. They're not necessarily in this to make money. Now, that being said, if someone bought our pattern to make quilts to sell, like go for it, girlfriend. Like sell a bunch of Belinda quilts. You bought the pattern once
You
because
bought the
they're getting
pattern once. You're
compensated for
okay
their
with
time.
that. So if I got way into your Nope quilt and just started making them and selling them on Etsy, you're okay with that. You okay with that?
Yeah, you bought the pattern.
You bought the
Cool.
pattern. And you don't
Now I
want me
haven't
to
talked to
buy the
Lynn about
pattern
that.
over
We
and
may
over.
have violently different opinions about that.
Right.
But we never said this isn't for commercial purposes. Like
Yeah.
some fabric, when it's manufactured, has that on the selvage. It's like, yeah, for it. You bought it. Go make a business. Go,
Right.
you
Do what
know,
you want with it.
yeah.
So you don't feel like I have to pay you a fee every time. Like if I was going to use it on Etsy, I just need to buy it once, and I can do whatever I want with it with your pattern.
I'm inclined to say, yeah, I'm okay with that, only because it's so hard to police.
It's so hard to
That being said, like
police.
maybe someone's out there making a bajillion dollars
Right. Now,
selling quilts for my pattern.
would you ever do something like for commercial use, just to get a license from you all to do the commercial use, like have that on as part of your pattern. Like if you want to use this commercially, please contact us. Something like that. I'm doing a whole paper on copyright notices and rights statements right now. So I'm curious.
I mean, I have thought about that. We have copyrighted our specific pattern, so it can't be reproduced. So like we own the content. The format itself actually belongs to our production partner, our friend Ray. So we've got that bit in there on our patterns, but we never explicitly forbade, commercial use or anything. So, because we didn't state it, I think we have to be okay with it.
Yeah, the question is what happens if you don't state it? I get that. And digital patterns are different than paper patterns. And for the law treats them differently, which is super weird. Okay, well, that's interesting. So what are you going to be doing at Quilt Market? You're at Quilt Market, first time, you've got a booth. Tell us what you're doing. And then you're going to come hang out with us a little bit if we're going to do a celeb sighting at our booth.
Probably going to be sweating a lot. I will probably be cursing. Lynn will not because she's better than me than that. And
that's interesting.
Going to try and smile. One of the other jokes is that I have RBF. And so like by default, I just have my dad's face and I just look like I'm mad.
Really? Look mad.
And I'm really not.
Be smiley and funny.
It's just like, I will be funny. I will also be exhausted at the end of the day because Lynn and I are both introverts.
Yeah,
and we have a live filming event.
Have you been to market before?
No, I have not. Lynn hasn't either. She's been to festival.
It's exhausting. It's quieter than festival, but it's exhausting. It's like beautiful and it's peaceful because there's not the huge crowds, but it's exhausting.
Yes.
Will you stay close by?
Well, yes, we have an Airbnb that we found.
Very cool. That's key.
Yeah.
The close.
So we have a retreat place.
Yeah. Well.
Yes, we're showcasing.
What? Go ahead.
I was going to say we're showcasing patterns, the pre-fused applique kits, the merchandise, not so much because this is a B2B event, not a B2C.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense. Like, go buy a t-shirt on the website, please. Yeah. And we've also got some wholesale programs that will be debuting there. Our block of the month, it's starting at Red Hen. We're repackaging for other quilt shops to buy if they want to run it. And what we're doing different, I think, than some others. So my day job right now is in marketing. And I have many years in marketing. Complements the engineering degree that I have for undergrad.
That's amazing. That's a great combo. That's an unusual combo, but it is really great.
It is. I'm really good at herding cats.
You need to go to my house.
Yeah. I saw one down there. I was like, oh, I see a cat.
Yes, right now. Yes. Usually we foster kittens. That's what we
good.
We usually have many little things jumping about, but we're taking a break just for a little while.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with my background, we try to build in like marketing support for all the programs of like, and here's how you could get the word out and you could do it this way, or maybe you want to.
Well, that's amazing. Having a marketing and engineering background, you can sort of see it in your patterns. And then you can see it in sort of how you get your patterns out. And this is a complicated world, but your pattern was really fun. So I can't wait to see what else you're sending out there and doing. I'll definitely do another pattern of yours. I think it's really good. I have a list at this point. I don't make it public because I've been quilting. I quilt every night for this project. And so I made 35 quilts last year. So I've done a lot of sort of I want to understand what you're doing. So when I have a conversation with you, I really get sort of who you are and in the kind of, what you've done. So I really had fun with your pattern. It was great. It was so much fun.
Good.
Okay. So any advice for us? A little bit of last time. So we went since IP. So we're brand new. We're not even 6 months old. I guess we are now, but 6 months old. We're not sure what we're doing next. Any thoughts on what we should be doing? Should we be any ideas? Think about you and your 6-month-old podcast. What were you doing? Like, how do we, or like Stitch TV?
So
right?
I like the variety of people that you've had. Yeah. So I would say keep that up because the different perspectives are interesting. And I think I'd be curious to know if your listenership are quilting professionals or quilting hobbyists.
Yeah. That's really
I don't know if
interesting.
you're
I
ever going to
hadn't
do
thought
a
about that.
survey,
Yeah, we
or
should
maybe
do
you
a
have done
survey.
one and I've missed it,
Yeah, no, I haven't.
about, who's listening.
Yeah,
Um, so I think that's key, is keep the variety up. I
yeah,
think also, I don't know if I'm sure there's a way to measure everything, but a way to measure the tolerance for IP. Now, when it comes to the law, like, well, there's black and white, but there's also a lot of arguing. Like,
yeah,
this is the law, this is not the law.
right.
But some of the things we talked about with, tolerance for commercial use or things like that, what is an
All over the
appropriate
map.
attitude?
Yeah, it's really interesting because now I'm going back because I'm writing a book about what I'm learning, and it is really all over the map on how people feel about all of it, and it's surprising to me. It really is up to each personal pattern maker how they feel at the moment. It's not there's no coherency in terms of like everybody feels this or this is the industry norm, which is really fascinating because it's an important part of the industry. So
Yeah, it's such a fragmented industry though, and I think where we've seen conglomeration happen when we look at F&W Media, like, that is truly a corporation, and you can tell in the difference of their contracts versus other magazines or other publications, where it's like, great, you submit a pattern to us, you get the rights back in a year, and we always keep the rights to resell that PDF pattern anytime we want. And so I've had a pattern published in F&W, and the rights came back to me. They're back now. And I'm like, okay, I can publish this pattern.
yeah,
So I have to look at then, well, what can I add to it now as an independent publisher that they couldn't get from the F&W
that's really
version of it?
And is that
And so that's
and so that's really that's really interesting. Yeah, fascinating, super interesting.
yeah.
Do you think that technology has made it harder for you in terms of competing with that there's so many everybody wants to be a pattern maker, like, and the free patterns, does that bother you? Like, where do you stand on like sort of the industry of pattern making at this point?
I cannot curse technology for opening up competition because I have also taken advantage of that.
Yeah.
We're just two ladies in Lynn's basement talking about quilts, and people around the world now.
I totally get
Well,
it.
you'd have to be in the basement with us. So can't really curse that part of it. And, I'm okay with free patterns. Where I draw the line is like someone looks at my pattern, rewrites it on their website, and it's like, free pattern. I'm like,
Really? Have you had that happen?
No, I haven't, but I could imagine that it would someday,
Yeah, your patterns are cool though. I mean, the thing about your patterns, having experienced it, is it's kind of like a conversation. There isn't just, it's really nice that way. And you kind of go along and it's got a lot of pictures, and if you follow it, it works out. I forgot to read
which is
part
nice.
of it. I had to rip out. I'm like, okay, I'll read the directions. Directions.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's the pattern and the value add, and color photographs and things that, like, it's worth buying the booklet, and it is a booklet that you get.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a full there's like, it's not just the back of a postcard, right? It's huge. It's good.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of stuff in it.
And we put in the playlist because everyone I know has music or TV or something playing while they're sewing. So we've got to watch or to listen to. And honestly, a lot of our pattern names are inspired by pop culture.
That's so great.
So the Nope quilt was just like me saying no. But I think everything else, like Diamonds Are Forever, which is like kind of the companion one to that, because Lynn and I got identical bundles of fabric and each had to design a quilt. And I said, what pattern could I design to use all of this fabric in one thing? And Lynn said, let me cut it up really small and make tiny pieces. So mine is like really big and hers is much smaller. Really, and we started with the same amount of fabric.
That's really great. That's so clever. That's so great. Well, I'm going to have to make more of your patterns. It's really fun.
Yeah.
I have just,
well, I appreciate that.
It's been so nice. I spent like 2 hours with you guys because I had Lynn before you, so it's really great. Yeah, it was fun.
We get people that are like, "Oh, I just found you guys. I'm binging," and we're like, "Oh, please take a break at some point." That's a lot of us.
Totally too much of you. Yes, I know, it's ridiculous. Yes, I understand. I get it. All right. Well, cool. Well, I cannot wait to see you at Market and hanging out with us at the festival. Can you drop me an email so that we can sort of, I'm sending them all to one person that's sort of organizing everything so that we could get it out there. And we're going to try Printful. That will be fun. And just keep watching you guys. It's great. I can't, it's really fun. I like those shows because it just feels like it's real and it's fun and it's like good to have in the background, and it's really, it's really just very, you don't feel alone, you feel like there's like, you're just hanging out,
Yeah. Part of why we started it was to help build that sense of community. That in modern guilds, there's some of that online, but there are a lot of people that are geographically isolated. They have mobility issues. They have bad internet connections. And that's why we do the talk show as an audio episode too. Because when we started doing video, people would be like, oh, keep the podcast up because I have bad internet where I live. I can't get anything faster. That's right. So and our whole thing is let's build community and lift each other up.
Well, I mean, that's how this whole project started, because I was on my daughter and I took a train trip for 6 weeks. And it turned out that we could not get any video at all. So we had to go to podcasts and music. And so I'm like, I'm now on a train for like 30 hours at a time. So I was like, okay, podcasts. And then how much political podcast can you watch? So I was like, all right, I'm going to listen to quilt podcasts for weeks upon weeks. So it's all good. Oh, it's so delightful to talk to you. Thank you so much. Do you need to review this before we put it up? Or are you good with what we talked about?
I'm good with what we talked about.
You are awesome. All right. You are fabulous. I will see you soon, just a couple months from now.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
So this is Elizabeth Townsend Guard. You've been listening to Just Wanna Quilt, a research podcast coming out of Tulane University Law School. We want to hear from you. Join our army, our quilting army. Go to our Facebook page. Suggest people